Right, so far we've been looking at the area of responsive communication, which is to do with the sensory experience of the people we're supporting, how they're experiencing the sensory world, their hypo and hyper sensitivities, and how that impacts their experience of the world. What we're going to be looking at now is intensive interaction as a way of building meaningful connections with people.
Emotional engagement.
Emotional engagement, yes. And I think promoting that interest in the social world, which can be such a challenge for people who are experiencing that level of emotional distress caused by their sensory processing issues. So we're looking at a method, a well-established, well-used method of looking at what the person is doing and, more importantly, how they're doing it. And
because body language expresses how we feel. It does for all of us.
Yes.
I mean, 75% of what we get from each other is not information, but actually, is this person about to walk out on me or thump me? Or, we tune in to their emotional levels, their affective state.
And I think one of the most useful ways that intensive interaction does that, it helps us empathetically tune in to what somebody's feeling by noticing what they're doing.
Yes,
noticing
but how they're doing it.
Yes, noticing what they're doing, noticing how they're experiencing what they're doing. That gives us a glimpse into their emotional reality at that moment.
But I think it's more than that. I think it's actually a physical how they're doing it. For example, if they're doing this,
what does that feel like?
You know they're all right at the minute. If they're doing the same gesture, you know, stand back because I'm going to get thumped. So the actual way that they do things expresses very directly how they feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with the groundwork of what we've been talking about why somebody might be doing that, it might be a coping strategy, we're looking at now, how can I use their action to say, I've noticed you, I'm interested in you, you're a valuable person.
And particularly to confirm what they're doing. Because one of the problems is that so many of them actually, people on autism, they're lacking confirmation of how they feel.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that then. My understanding is that all of us, when we're at a very, very early stage of our development, get our confirmation from our caregivers, whether that's parents or strangers or whatever. Adults copy tiny human beings. It's what we do. It's what we all do naturally. Every time that happens to a tiny baby, that baby gets a sense of, oh, I exist. And if we look at what's... Do you want to say it?
I think it's actually more than that.
Well, I was going on to say a bit more, Phoebe.
What I mean, it confirms what they're doing. Damasio says that when I see you do something, I get two messages to my brain. One tells me that you're wriggling your fingers.
Yes.
And the other one tells me that my eyes are seeing you wriggling your fingers. So when I see you do something, it actually tells me something about myself.
Yes.
And it's that which is the confirmation, or I'm hearing something, my ears are working. So, and it's that confirmation which seems to be missing. So what you get a sort of stereotype really is, you know, baby says boo, mum says boo-hoo, and baby can then move on. But if it's the baby initiates, mother confirms, baby moves on. Now what seems to happen in autism is that many of them are getting stuck, needing if they don't get confirmation, they can't move on unless they get confirmation.
And I think part of the mechanics of that almost are what gets in the way of that baby being able to receive the confirmation which is undoubtedly being sent in its direction, like it is for all babies. We all get that. We get loads of confirmation sent and we absorb it.
Well, we
and it keeps you and I wouldn't be able to speak if it hadn't happened to us.
Yes.
So that happens to a baby, a neurotypical baby, a baby who's developing typically. It happens again and again and again. And it's this incredibly important building block in this baby's ability to move from expressive communication towards intentional communication. So what happens with the baby where there are barriers to that baby absorbing the confirmation that's being sent. For instance, its sensory processing doesn't allow it to notice or absorb the confirmation of
Yes.
And that's where the
I mean, you know, you get this sort of thing in attachment disorder, but the parent may be doing splendidly,
yes.
but the baby just can't take it in
yes.
because the messages are not getting to the brain.
Or they're being received, but then they're being scrambled because of the sensory overload.
Then we have to go back to, I think one of the key things that intensive interaction is doing is confirmation.
Absolutely.
I think that's the centre.
Yeah.
And if they don't get that confirmation, then they can't move on. And that's why they get stuck with the mechanical things that have to happen later in order for them to respond.
Because essentially, instead of getting the confirmation from its caregivers, that baby starts to confirm its own existence through its habits.
Absolutely, exactly.
So that internal confirmation becomes hugely more important than any confirmation it's getting from outside, because it makes more sense, because it's mine, I understand it.
It gets hardwired in.
Yes.
And so they don't, it bypasses the complicated process. The brain says, I know that, all right, okay, that'll just go on, I don't have to bother about that.
Yes.
It doesn't have to go through the processing hoops, really.
Yeah. And I think the liberating thing about intensive interaction is that it tells us that there isn't a chronological door that's slammed shut on our ability to use confirmation to say, I notice you. Effectively, that's what we're doing for people. Yes. We're giving them confirmation in a way that is already hardwired in, that they understand, but the surprise element is, it's coming from the outside world.
And also little bits of change as you do it gradually. So if, for example, someone does that, you might go... So you change the rhythm slightly. Right. Because at first the brain says, I know that. Oops!
Yeah.
And it's that little jolt which actually shifts attention from solitary self-stimulation to shared
activity. What I might do to begin with is do it as exactly as possible to start with. I'm not going to bring in the surprise. The surprise element to begin with is, my goodness, mine but not mine.
Yeah.
My internal message coming from outside. That's, I think, to start with, is interesting and stimulating and surprising enough. I think further down the line is where we use that embellishment of doing
you may, but I have to say that I go into embellish. I'm simply learning their language.
Yes.
So as soon as I've grasped their language, which may be almost in the first thing, I will start to do it as I may begin a phrase in their language, but almost immediately I will be using the rest of their language. Yeah. So provided I keep it within the parameters, and particularly that means provided I keep within the rhythms, the brain will take it on. Yeah. It's got to be like enough. Yeah. You know, who is it? He said parenting have to be good enough. Is that
Winnicott?
Yeah. And this phrase, good enough, this has to be a good enough match.
Yes.
And then what happens is that as soon as they see that if they make an utterance or a movement or they will start to add little bits of difference themselves. They'll turn around almost immediately and add something else. Okay. So we have to be desperately aware that and to continue the conversation and not continue just doing the thing which...
Yeah, I think you're talking from a position of huge experience and confidence in this method. And I think sometimes for somebody starting, you will be able to grasp, because of your experience and your intuition, you will be able to grasp somebody's language really quite quickly. I think for people starting intensive interaction, they might need to really make sure they are understanding the person's inner world language before they start trying to do the embellishment. Because what I see happening so often is people thinking this should be moving faster than it is and try to do something more
elaborate.
More elaborate than is needed. And I think to begin
then you fall into it.
Yes, then you fall into the trap of leading the interaction rather than being led by the interaction.
But what's interesting then is if you've gone wrong, you can use that, because you can back. What you have to do is use your own body language. It's not just about reading their body language, it's also about using your own. So if you see the tension rising, you go, and move back. And so you respond. Now, mime, I think, is grossly underestimated as intensive interaction is practiced at minute. We have to respond with our own body language.
Yes.
And surprise, surprise, they seem to be able to read it extremely well.
Yeah, because we're not complicating it with words.
Exactly.
Sometimes one of the things I've learned from you so clearly and so long ago is zip it.
Yes.
If the other person isn't using language, my language, why should I be using my language? The language I need to be using with this person is theirs, not mine. So my discipline is to stop nattering, to stop making observations and rely on body language. And you're right, mine as well. So when I am responding to a mistake I've made or a change in expression, I'm going to quite obviously pause, but I'm going to make that pause rather than, oh, that was interesting, what did you do that for? Because immediately I'm blah, 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 blah. I'm overloading that person. So if we're going back to what do we mean by copying, mirroring, celebrating, responding to what the person's doing, a lot of that is to do with observation. So you're picking up the language the person is using. You're looking at the sensory language the person is using to connect with themselves. So what is it about tearing that piece of paper? What is it that's so satisfying? Is it the way she's looking at it? Is it the sound of it? Is it the vibration of it? And the only way I can speculate about that is to try it myself.
Because I was going to say, do you actually analyse it? Because quite frankly, I don't.
No, that's because you're so good at it, Phoebe.
No, it isn't. You simply do what they're doing. You're looking at what physical feedback they're giving themselves. And in order to do that, you've got to do it yourself.
Absolutely. So that's the speculation bit for me. Do it. Yeah, that's why I do it. So I'd have a piece of paper, and I'd be feeling,
and you'll get the same feedback as they're getting.
Yeah, and I'm not getting trapped in analysis paralysis about thinking, why do they feel that? What is it? So what is it?
But it's also how they're doing it.
Yeah. Okay.
It's different from.
Absolutely. So that I'd be feeling in my arms. You know, if I was ripping it that much, I'd be feeling it in my arms. So I'd be thinking, how can I give her some response that lets me know that I've noticed the impact she's giving herself? In
another film, where the man is doing this.
Yeah.
Learning the language. The film. Yes. And the man is doing this.
Yeah.
And he's giving himself feedback here, and that's the obvious one.
Yeah.
But actually, he's also giving himself feedback here. And when I tap the floor to that rhythm, it doesn't make any difference. But when I tap his arm to that rhythm,
he's interested.
And he turns around and looks at me and smiles.
Another bit about that film. Go on. Sorry.
Yes, all right, go on.
Another bit about that film that I find interesting, when you first notice this, you try it on yourself. You try that on yourself, and then very quickly...
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yes, you try it on him. Then you go down a little bit of a blind alley, because you get the electric massager, because you're thinking, he's stimulating that part of his hand.
Yes, quite.
So I'll use that. But it's a different rhythm.
And also, both our attention
is on one
focus
thing.
On, which is another problem.
Yes.
Actually, if you use equipment, attention of both of you will focus on the third object, and not on this, which is the most important bit.
Unless it's an object that you can be interactive with, and that wasn't, because all he wanted to do with it was balance it.
Yes, exactly.
And I think he only wanted to balance it because the rhythm he was getting from it was so different to this. So then you go back to celebrating his rhythm, because he's got string and you're using string and you're doing it visually. When he takes your string, you begin to do it physically.
Yes. And then he just starts to turn around.
And I love the fact that it was okay that, that didn't work. It just gave you a bit more information about what would work.
I've got to learn that language. You don't learn painlessly.
No.
It's important. I'm not totally with you on the word celebrate, and you know that. We've talked about it before. Yeah. Because I think it may lead people to respond. I'm interested in language which is puts us on terms of total equality because we're interacting with each other within the parameters of the same restrictions, basically. And I don't want to feel that I'm the one who's
yes,
over,
you're right. Because I do, because there's a danger then of that giving us permission to try and entertain this person.
Yes,
and that's not what we're doing. Essentially, we're being entertained by this person.
Well,
we are watching them so carefully.
We're having a conversation, just as you and I have been having a conversation, equals. Because we are discussing, in this case, the parameters are discussing this particular subject.
The reason I use the word celebrate, and it's a word I've stolen from Dave Hewitt and Melanie Nine from one of their earliest books. The reason I like that word is that it gets away from the idea a lot of people have got about intensive interaction, that I've just got to be this blank mirror. I've just got to do what the person is doing without reference to how they're doing it. And I think it gets away from that a little bit. I bet there's one word that we agree on that neither of us will use, and that's mimic.
We certainly never use the word
this
mimic.
is a million miles away from mimicking something,
Exactly.
which to me is disrespectful.
Because mimicking is disrespectful. And what we are doing is we are valuing a person so much that we take the trouble to learn their language.
Which is a huge relief to any of us.
Then we can talk to each other on terms of complete equality. So you talk to me, I talk to you. I don't necessarily celebrate what you're.
But if all I was doing was quite blandly copying or mirroring what you were doing,
I'd certainly be into you then.
Yes, I might. Yes, but I might not get a feeling of warmth. I'm trying to inject a bit of empathetic. Kind of
the problem about empathy,
it
has to be an internal response and not something you do, because they will rumble you immediately if the empathy isn't genuine, and that's where I think there's a danger with that particular word. But maybe where I'm over-egging this particular.
We could argue about words for a long time, but the essence of this is absolutely an empathetic and respectful response to the way the person is connecting with themselves, is coping with what the world is asking them to cope with.
But also is enjoying this extraordinary revelation that there's something outside there which has meaning for my brain. Everything I'm doing, I'm actually looking at, is this particular thing have meaning for this brain? That's the key question. So is it raising the stress or is it bringing it down? And that's what I'm looking for, monitoring all the time. Not consciously, but it's there all the time.
And we have to be aware of that if we're going to do this effectively.
First of all, we have to empty ourselves. But we also have to have this. Well, basically, we empty our brains, but we have to keep the left brain ticking over and watching what's happening.
I think there's a huge amount of unconscious, if you like, observation, speculation, how do I respond going on, and the more you do it, the less you notice you're doing it. But to begin with, if we're trying to encourage people to give this a go, I think the biggest thing is observation. It's observing what the person is doing most deeply.
But not detached observation.
Oh no.
What I don't do is go through people's notes for ages, because 99% of the time there's nothing in there which gives you a clue. You
Go on, after you.
It's observation on the job,
absolutely,
as you do it. The point is that we have to be totally and intimately connected with the person that we're doing. We have to be in them, so to speak.
And why I bang on about observation is because sometimes I think people think you've observed, then you do.
Yes,
To me, the observation has to run all the way through this conversation, because this person keeps changing their language.
Absolutely.
They're multilingual here.
They're changing the words of their language, so we have to constantly.
They're changing the rhythm of it, they're changing the pace of it, they're changing so much of it, the intensity of it.
I think we've already talked about rhythm and how important it is, but it is the basis of it. But I would like to go back just for a minute to mother and baby.
Yes.
Because mother actually is not, she's doing it instinctively. Or caregiver, but I think I'm going to use the term mother just because that's where most of it happens. She's using the term instinctively.
Yes.
So she doesn't sit there and say, "Oh, baby's said boo, I must
say boo now."
Yes, it comes from gut level.
Tell me more about Gary Ephraim and his research into that.
Well, Gary is the person who actually started intensive interaction. It was called augmented mothering at the time, but it ran into trouble with the age-appropriate Wolfensberg.
Well, also I think sexism, because it implies that fathers can't do it and non-parents are no good at it. And I'd like to stick up for the non-parents.
I think that's a retrospective gender-sensitive equation.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think that's really the point. I think what the point is that he looked at the work of Daniel Stern about mother and baby interactions. And that's, of course, where the female thing came. And it's perfectly true that some men are extremely good at it doesn't have to be gender specific. It just happens biologically that usually it's mom. And anyway, Gary was working in a hospital in London, near London, and they brought him. He was a consultant psychologist, and they brought him all the most difficult people who they couldn't do anything with, and their behaviour was difficult to manage and all that sort of thing. And he said his psychology degree hadn't given him a clue as to what, these are his words,
yes,
as to what to do.
Yeah.
And so one day, out of sheer desperation, he started joining in with what they were doing. And he was terribly surprised when they all sat up and started taking notice. So he tried it with all the others, and they all, it was just sort of knock on. And he unfortunately didn't write it up. This is where the real snag comes. I was incredibly lucky because I had a Roundtree Foundation at one stage, a Roundtree Foundation research grant. And he was my supervisor for 4 years. And he taught me this. Before that, I'd been working within people's individual preferences and making equipment for that. So it actually dovetailed pretty well. We both started.
Because what you were doing was looking at people's actions and how to make some sort of game out of what they were doing.
Not so much game, but how to use the feedback they were giving themselves and all that sort of thing.
It's absolutely along the safe wavelength.
Because I think actually one of the things we haven't talked about is the danger of getting into games. This is what we do with so and so.
Yes. Yeah.
And that really is a disaster, because then you overlook any response from them. And how they are moving on, but actually you're not listening to them.
Yeah.
Anyway, to go back to Gary, he didn't write this up, and so he left it to other people. And Dave Hewitt was one of the earliest people who was associated with him, and he wrote it up, and Millian Nin wrote it up, and I wrote it up. And I started to specialise just accidentally, because these were the people I came across and I was working with people with autism. And so that's where my interest came. And Gary was absolutely wonderful. He taught me really that I was the best piece of equipment I'd got.
Yes.
And that one had to use one's own body, one had to engage with people through one's own self.
Yeah, because you are actually the most interesting and versatile piece of equipment that your person is ever going to encounter, and you have the ability to respond in a way that an object doesn't.
From their point of view, you may be. I've worked with people 60, and you get the impression, this is the first time anybody's ever bothered to speak to me in a way that has meaning for me. And you can see the relief and the stress pouring off them, and the joy. Yeah. Again and again. It doesn't matter whether they're 2 or 65. It doesn't matter what gender they are. It doesn't matter what race they are. I work in Sweden, Denmark, and it really doesn't matter.
This is a fairly universal language.